The Nikkor Z 28 to 400mm f4 to f8 is a full-frame hyper-wide-range zoom released in April of 2024 for a suggested retail price of $1,297. It's a standard 9-rounded blade diaphragm and a rather ugly variable aperture range of f4 to f8 at the widest and f22 to f45 stopped all the way down. It's constructed of 21 elements in 15 groups, including 4 ED and 3 aspherical elements, and no additional coatings to the inherent super integrated coating, making this a rather simple optical design to Nikon standards. The price you pay for versatility, I suppose. But at least they gave us vibration reduction. It's internally focusing but externally zooming with a minimum focus distance of 0.2 meters at 28 and 1.2 meters at 400, the US equivalent of 0.66 feet at 28 and 3.94 feet at 400 millimeter. It's 84.5 by 141 millimeters in size and 725 grams in weight, unless you live in the US where it's 3.4 by 5.6 inches and 1 pound 9.6 ounces. Alright, so what do we think of this hyper versatile lens here? It does have some weight to it. It's not incredibly strange looking until you zoom it out. But first, on the side, there is a lock switch right over here. And if that is in the lock position, then it will not zoom. You unlock that and you can zoom. Will it lock? It will not lock in any other position other than 28 millimeter. Other than that, there are no switches. There's a programmable ring here that I always turn off because if I set it to aperture, I bump it all the time. So whatever it's set to, it'll constantly make changes. So I turn that off in the camera. It's not a crazy looking lens until you zoom it all the way out, where it is rather silly and incredibly front heavy. Holding it in my hand like this, it's whatever. Go like that and it wants to fall. And I do have to say, because you guys know I give it to you straight, the company I rented this from is Lens Rentals, and they did an abysmal job of cleaning this particular lens. Now, that is not typical of the items that I have rented from them, but I just did the 50mm f1.4 review, and it was dirty. This also is dirty. I went and just wiped out all of this, and that worries me because that makes me think that this can gather dust and just pull it all inside. This is why I don't like externally zooming and focusing lenses, or the type of focusing where it's like recessed and it's internal, but it's still kind of external. It's like exposed to the elements. But don't worry, Lens Rentals, because I, the customer, will return this to you in a much better hygienic state than you delivered it to me in. Let's look at the rear element here. Good Lord, it's deep. So when you zoom this out, the rear element actually goes with it, right? That's going to be impossible to see, but that is a deep, deep canyon. I would highly recommend that you keep this closed and probably locked whenever you're changing it. One, you don't want that sticking out there and bumping something, but secondly, you don't want that exposed to the elements. It is really, really deep. The rear lens element does look nice and good. Let's look at the front. It should be great because they have these lens filters on the front. I will take this off to inspect, but I will do my videos with this on. I don't like lens filters. You guys have heard me say that before. It's just not my lens, and so I'm not going to risk it. It does have an incredibly stupid looking lens hood. It's the square. It does go on really nice. It's a nice solid click to get it on there. Boy, that lens hood really takes this rather normal looking lens and makes it pretty silly looking. But who cares about any of this? What kind of images can it take? Let's go out and let's get that part of the test taken care of. All right, so I am mounted up with the 28 to 400 f4 to f8. And the first thing we got to do is our focus speed. Let's try it first at 28. I'd say focus speed is all right. It's not real fast, it's not real slow. Let's try it at 400. we got to do our saturation. Let's do our blue right here. Blue looks pretty good through the viewfinder. Let's do our yellow. Yellow looks pretty good through the viewfinder as well. Let's do the tractor over here for our green. Green, I'd say kind of looks normal through the viewfinder. This f8 is really painful. We're gonna do our black and white ability on our trusty old post over there. And I'm just gonna pick something between 28 and 400. That way I can actually have a little bit more wide of an aperture. We're at a weird f7.6 because of the focal length that we're at. It's so painful, right? Because it's so bright outside and the sun is hitting my subject directly. And I have to be at f7.6 at this particular focal length that we're at. And that makes me have to be at ISO 200 in this kind of light. I don't like that. You guys probably know that I like my wider apertures, right? I like shallow depth of field. It's just kind of key to what I do. Stood up a little too fast, but it's fine. You know, we're gonna jump into Lightroom and see what these look like. I was just shooting some B-roll and I noticed something a little funky with the 28 to 400. Check it out. Oh, it's still going. Slowly. It's 50. This is still going. Doesn't do it the other way. Oh, maybe it does. Yeah, it does. All right, so we are in Lightroom with images from the Nikkor Z 28 to 400 f4 to f8. We are doing this a little bit different. I'm going to do the test images and the walk around images all in this segment because I have to admit I did not enjoy using this lens. I really didn't. This has nothing to do with like the fact that I just don't particularly like wide range zooms. It has everything to do with that aperture. I found that f4 to f8 kind of miserable to shoot with, and I just didn't enjoy using this lens. Now, with that being said, I'm not going to let that influence what I think about this lens while grading the test images. And we're going to get into that right now. But you guys know I just keep it 100 with you. It can have excellent optics and I just don't enjoy it. And if I don't enjoy it, I'm not going to shoot it. I'm a photographer, but I love photography, right? And if I'm not enjoying myself, then what the heck are we doing? The red saturation is actually really good. Most Nikon Z lenses have great red saturation. Nothing comes to mind right off the bat that has flat, boring reds. But as far as sharpness goes, let's get into an unfair 200%. It's not super sharp, let's be honest. This is at f5.6, 58 millimeters. It's just not, this isn't super sharp. Now there was a little bit of wind, and I'm at 1/100th of a second. I didn't think it was moving that much, but maybe it's motion blur. We'll see more. Blue actually looks pretty good. Good saturation on the blue. Actually, a lot of contrast. Yellows are very, very saturated, so that's good. We're getting good marks on saturation. Green, let's see what green does. Green looks really good. Rich greens. Okay, so we will deliver high marks on saturation. I think this lens does really good in saturation and has pretty good contrast. I'll look at this again. Yeah, we'll see more. I have a few that I think will really show us how contrasty this is. This is at f6, 79 millimeters. We're checking for fringing around here. It's well controlled, but it really wants to. This right here almost starts to flare. This lens on these harsh highlights, it's almost like it's correcting for something, but it's very kind of peculiar. It's like it really, really wants to fringe, but it is controlled enough. I've never seen something ride like a fine line like that. Decent separation. I'm not seeing any other fringing. Sometimes you can get green fringes in these cracks in the deep shadow, but this one isn't doing it, so I say it's pretty well controlled. Very good. There's some weird kind of ugliness going on in here that I don't see too often. This is at 200% though. If we back out to 100%, you can't really see all that. I can, but my eye is like really good and now I'm looking for it. Now this is at 165 millimeter f7.6, and really it's not that sharp of a lens, but because there's so much contrast, it looks sharper than it actually is. That's what I've been calling lately the difference between detailed and sharp. You can have sharpness but have very little differentiation between different levels of tone, right? And that contrast gives, like, if you have a lot of contrast, then you get all these little differences in the tones, make it appear sharper. When you get in here at 100, you can see how not really that sharp it is, but when you back out, it looks really sharp, right? And that's the benefit of having a really contrasty lens, which this lens is. I would give this top marks on contrast, right? Because there's just a rich tone to it, and then I'd give it top marks for saturation too. It's just not that dang sharp. But that's not why we took these images. We take this image for black and white ability. The rule is we do nothing but brighten it up to where it needs to be, and we just hit the black and white button. Not terrible, very middle of the road black and white ability. It's not flat. It's not flat, but it's not, you know, it's not like a 1. It's definitely not like a 3. Makes me reevaluate some other lenses that maybe I gave higher marks to, maybe some that I gave lower marks to. As always, let's throw a little, do we want Gravedigger or do we want BW Grit and Gravy? Let's go with Gravedigger this time. If you want to pick up this preset, you can do so at zwadephoto.com/digital products. Gravedigger and BW Grit and Gravy are in 2 different packs, but they are really good at taking lenses with bad black and white ability and making some cool black and whites. And then lenses that do have good black and white ability, it just makes them even better. But it definitely saves the ones that are lower on the black and white ability scale. This one, however, is right in the middle, so no surprise that this looks pretty sweet. It may actually texture that up a little bit. Yeah. So now let's move on to the very short walk around. To be honest, I just kind of plinked a few photos because I did not enjoy this lens. That doesn't mean this lens is bad. This lens is for someone. I've already established in the test image section that this lens is not bad. It has some great things going for it, but I did not enjoy this lens. It felt clunky in my hands. It felt weird in my hands. That doesn't mean it'll be weird for you, but it's very weird for me. I just didn't enjoy it. I didn't like being, stuck at f8 at 400. I had to wait until the sun was directly on top of me. And I don't like shooting like that. I like when the sun casts across things. That's the kind of lighting that I like. And that's the only way. I got down to ISO 80 for this at f8, 1/320th of a second. I could have gone down lower, but still f8, at 400 millimeter, it's just painful for me. That's not how I like to shoot. But let's check these out anyway. Again, not that sharp, but it's got a lot of contrast. As long as you don't zoom in, this lens is totally fine. That's my preset habanero, and I just bring back the aqua and blue. I'm not a huge fan of the background blur. It's kind of blocky, but the bokeh balls are these little small bokeh balls that are coming through. They're pretty circular. I'll give it that. And there does seem to be a nice fall off to the background that seems, it seems like it's because the lens isn't super duper sharp anyway, and it kind of makes this transition a lot smoother, which is a benefit. Now in much higher priced lenses, you get that with extreme sharpness, but this lens is, 25% of the price of those lenses. The colors are good. The contrast is good. Let's give this one a little bit of a play without a preset. Oh yeah, that background starts getting funky with contrast. That looks that's ugly. But with the little 1-2, I didn't do anything to color. I didn't do any saturation, no vibrance, nothing on the colors. This is just what you get with, you know, the basic adjustments. It's pretty rich looking. I don't know what I was doing there. There's absolutely no way that's going to recover. Oh, maybe it will. Yeah, the bokeh on this lens at f8 is it's ugly bokeh. That's just my opinion. You may like this. I think it's wacky. Habanero's pretty good right there. Like I said, that's one click with my habanero preset, which is part of the portrait swag pack. And it's a little goofy looking with these oranges, but I don't care. It's a rich rendering lens. It renders really rich. I'll give it credit where credit's due. I didn't enjoy using it, but it's not a terrible lens. I didn't add any contrast to this, but again, I just want to make the note that the contrast on this lens is really, really good. Really good. It's a very rich image as long as you don't get close to it. You get close to it and it's soft. You can just see the softness. And this is softness at f8, you know, and you don't really have a choice but to shoot at f8. I imagine if you stop down anymore, you're going to lose sharpness. Maybe not. I don't know. I just know that it looks a little bit soft whenever you get up close. But as long as you don't get in at 200% or 100% and you just leave the image as it is, like this, you don't have to do a whole lot to the images as far as editing goes. All I did with this one was a little exposure. I pulled the highlights a little bit, and that's it. I didn't add any color, no contrast, no shadows, no whites, no blacks. I didn't do anything. And so that helps me decide what this lens is and who it's for, which we will cover in the conclusion. The 28 to 400 f4 to f8. What can I say about it? As I already covered, I didn't enjoy using this lens, but I do have to say that it's a pretty good optic. There's a commonly held belief that is backed up by lots of fact, that is that wide range zooms generally just aren't that good. You have to make tons of sacrifices in order to get that kind of versatility. That has generally been absolutely fact. It just is. Something has to give. The optics have to give, and you get the variable aperture, you get, you know, wide ranges of aperture, and it has to be that way. Otherwise, it would be way too big and way too expensive. And these hyper versatile zooms don't generally market themselves to wealthy photographers or professional photographers. You know, they do a lot for a particular type of photographer. Even though I did not enjoy using this lens, and I have to elaborate on that a little bit. At the end of the day, I'm just somebody that loves photography, and I happen to have a very, very good eye. And I know I didn't take a ton of images with this lens, and I'll have people in the comments saying that I didn't give this lens its due. And maybe you're right, but this lens for me personally was a drag. It was a drag to use. And I love photography. And so if something makes me kind of bleh whenever I'm out in the field, I'm not going to continue. I'm going to pack up, I'm going to go home, and I'm going to get one of the lenses that I love, and I'm going to go shoot something that I love. This lens just made me depressed out in the field. I hated using it. However, Nikon seems to have fixed basically all of the inherent issues with a lens that tries to do too many things. 28 to 400 is a huge range. Optically, the only thing it's really lacking is sharpness. If you don't zoom in to look at the image, then we saw that it looks really good because there's so much contrast in this lens that it makes up for its shortcomings in the sharpness department. It looks sharp because it gets tons of detail, because it picks up almost every single little tiny nothing little transition in tone. All of the different colors that I observe, they're either rich or they're better than, honestly, the green. Nikon is normally, like, their greens are generally kind of normal looking. This is beyond normal. It's a little more saturated than normal. So saturation, really, really good. Just because I didn't enjoy using it, That doesn't mean it's bad. It just means I didn't enjoy it. This would be a great lens for somebody. And the fact that it does a lot of things with not a whole ton of drawbacks, there's definitely more pros than there are cons. It's fine. For the price that you pay for this, it's a good optic that does a lot. That's kind of a new thing of something covering so much ground and actually still being a good optic. zwadephoto.com/theopticexplorer. You can check out the overall grade that I give this lens as well as every category that I test, and zwadephoto.com/digital products to pick up the presets. If you don't want to do any of that and you're shopping for this lens, I do recommend that you rent before you buy, because this lens wasn't my bag and it might not be your bag. Rent before you buy, and if you do buy, come on back here, check the link in the description. I get a 2% commission if you do so. I'm Z Wade, the Z Wade, and Z Wade Photo. Stay sharp, YouTube.